Welcome to Silent Secrets. I'm your host for tonight's mystery. Today's tale begins with a quiet moment, a simple knock, a forgotten letter, and a truth that was never meant to be discovered. But one hidden secret, buried in the shadows, will turn an ordinary day into a night no one will ever forget. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to Silent Secrets and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We love seeing how far these mysteries travel. Now settle in, dim the lights, and let's uncover tonight's silent secret. Chapter 1. Fey Snowfall at Evergreen Square. Snow fell with deliberate grace upon Evergreen Square, as though the night itself had decided to be generous. Each flake drifted downward unhurriedly, settling upon rooftops, garlands, and the broad shoulders of evergreen trees that framed the town's central plaza. Lanterns glowed amber against the white, and strings of lights traced the outlines of shop windows and balconies, transforming the square into a scene that seemed preserved from another, gentler time. Hercule Poirot paused at the edge of the square, his boots planted carefully upon the packed snow, his posture immaculate despite the cold. He adjusted his scarf with fastidious precision and surveyed the scene before him with eyes that missed nothing. "Well, Hastings," he said, "if one wished to invent the perfect Christmas town, one could do no better." Captain Arthur Hastings laughed, stamping his feet lightly to restore warmth. "It's magnificent, Poirot, straight out of a holiday card. I must say, I'm rather glad this is not another grim affair in a fog-bound city." Poirot smiled faintly. "Appearances, my friend, are often most convincing where the desire to believe is strongest." Evergreen Square bustled with activity. Vendors sold hot cider and roasted chestnuts, their breath clouding in the cold air. Carolers gathered near the bandstand, voices rising in practiced harmony. Families pressed together, children wrapped in scarves and woolen hats, their eyes bright with anticipation. At the heart of it all stood the old clock tower, built of dark stone and capped with a copper roof now dusted white. It loomed over the square with quiet authority. Its great clock face glowed softly, marking the minutes until the town's most cherished tradition. For 20 years, without fail, Harold Finch had emerged from that tower on Christmas Eve, dressed in red and white, his booming laugh echoing across the square as Evergreen's own Father Christmas. Poirot's gaze lingered on the tower. "Ah," he murmured, "there is the center of gravity." Hastings followed his look. "Harold Finch, I've heard of him already. The innkeeper spoke of little else on our arrival. Apparently the man is a local institution." "Yes," Poirot said thoughtfully, "institutions inspire affection, but also dependence." They moved closer, weaving gently through the growing crowd. Poirot observed the organizers stationed near the base of the tower, men and women wearing matching green scarves, each emblazoned with the town crest. They smiled broadly, greeting townsfolk and visitors alike, yet their movements betrayed a subtle stiffness. Poirot noticed it at once. A woman holding a clipboard laughed too quickly. A man tasked with coordinating the parade glanced repeatedly at his pocket watch. Another organizer rubbed his hands together not from cold, but from nerves. "Do you see it, Hastings?" Poirot asked quietly. "See what?" Hastings replied, distracted by a group of children tugging excitedly at their parents' sleeves. "They are encouraged." Hastings frowned. "You're imagining things. Everyone's simply busy." "Busy people are efficient," Poirot said. "Anxious people are careful." The crowd hushed almost at once, a ripple of expectation passing through them. Children surged forward, parents restraining them gently. A voice called out, amplified by a small speaking trumpet. "5 minutes, everyone. Father Christmas will be with us shortly." Cheers erupted. Poirot folded his gloved hands behind his back, watching the faces around him. Delight, yes, but also something else, anticipation tinged with apprehension, the sort that comes when tradition is fragile, and no one dares to say so aloud. A middle-aged man approached the organizers, his brow creased. Poirot caught fragments of the exchange. "He's late. Everything's fine." "Are you sure he?" The rest was lost beneath the swell of voices. Hastings leaned closer. You're not going to tell me you suspect foul play at a Christmas parade? Poirot did not answer immediately. His attention was fixed on the clock tower door, closed, silent. Tell me, Hastings, he said at last, how often do traditions fail? Hastings shrugged. They don't, usually. That's why they're traditions. Just so, Poirot replied. And when they do fail, the shock is all the greater. Snow continued to fall. The clock's minute hand crept forward. The organizers exchanged glances, brief, loaded, swiftly masked. One of them, a young man with a carefully trimmed beard, wiped his brow despite the cold. Poirot's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Something has already gone wrong, he said softly. Hastings stared at him. What on earth makes you think that? Poirot inclined his head toward the tower. Because no one is looking up with joy. They are looking up with hope. The crowd counted down aloud as the final seconds approached. 10, 9, 8. Poirot felt it then. Not fear exactly, but a tightening in the air, like the stillness before snow grows heavy enough to break a branch. 3, 2, 1. The clock struck. The great bell rang out, echoing across Evergreen Square. Children clapped. Parents smiled. But the door of the clock tower did not open. A murmur spread through the crowd. Laughter followed, nervous, indulgent. Any moment now, someone called. Poirot did not smile. He watched the organizers closely as seconds stretched into a full minute. Their forced cheer faltered. The woman with the clipboard whispered urgently to the man with the watch. Another organizer took an involuntary step toward the tower, then stopped. Hastings felt it now, too, the subtle shift from delight to confusion. Well, he said, lowering his voice. That is rather odd. Poirot nodded once. Yes, my friend. And Christmas, when it goes wrong, has a way of doing so very thoroughly. The snow fell on, indifferent and beautiful. Above them, the clock tower remained closed, and somewhere behind the stone and gears, something, or someone, was failing to play their part. Hercule Poirot stood very still, listening not to the carols, nor to the murmurs of the crowd, but to the silence where a familiar laugh should have been. The celebration had begun, and already, Evergreen's Christmas was in danger of unraveling. Chapter 2, Fey and Empty Tower. The church bells began their peal, with a confidence that seemed almost defiant. Their sound rolled across Evergreen Square in warm, familiar waves, an old melody of bronze and tradition that had for generations signaled the town's Christmas Eve moment. For a heartbeat, the crowd clung to that certainty. People smiled, children bounced in place, and more than one voice called out, "Here he comes." But the clock tower door remained closed. A minute passed. Then another. The first ripple of laughter was indulgent, good, humored, the kind reserved for a performer who enjoys making an entrance. A child near the front craned his neck, his woolen hat slipping sideways as he stared at the door with fierce concentration. Maybe he's waiting for a big surprise, the boy said. Of course, his mother replied too quickly, tightening her grip on his mittened hand. He'll be right out. The organizers, those in green scarves, began to move in small, purposeful circles. They clustered close together, speaking in lowered tones, their smiles stiffening with every passing second. Captain Hastings shifted uneasily. Perhaps he's forgotten something, he said, still trying to sound cheerful. Or perhaps he's having trouble with the costume. Poirot did not reply. His eyes had already fixed on the subtle signs that others did not wish to see. The way one organizer's fingers trembled around a set of keys, the way another kept swallowing, as though his throat had dried to paper. The bells continued. Their cheerfulness now sounded oddly indifferent. Children began to murmur. Where is he? Did he go away? Is Father Christmas real? The last question, asked in a small and suddenly frightened voice, made several adults stiffen as if struck. No celebration likes to be reminded how quickly magic can dissolve. Poirot stepped closer to the organizers. He addressed the woman with the clipboard. Her name tag read Evelyn Marsh. "Madam," he said courteously, "it seems Mr. Finch is delayed." Evelyn's smile was strained. "Only a moment, sir. He likes to build anticipation." Poirot's gaze held hers. "Anticipation is one thing. This is something else." Her eyes flickered away. A man with the trimmed beard. Poirot had noticed him earlier, interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "We should open it." Evelyn swallowed. "Not in front of everyone." "If we don't," the man hissed, "we'll have panic." Poirot watched the exchange. Panic was already beginning, soft and contained, like steam trapped in a kettle. Inspector, or rather, there was no inspector here, no police presence yet. Evergreen was the sort of town that trusted its traditions to keep order. That was why Poirot's presence felt suddenly absurdly out of place, like a scalpel in a bakery. But Poirot did not need an official title to recognize a problem. He stepped forward, raising his voice just enough to be heard without shouting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, "please remain at ease. There is no reason for alarm." The crowd turned toward him, startled by the assurance in his tone. Hastings blinked. He had not expected Poirot to take command so readily. Poirot continued, "It is cold, and the children are growing restless. Perhaps it would be wise, madam." He looked at Evelyn Marsh, to allow someone to check that all is well in the tower. Evelyn's face tightened. For a brief instant, she seemed poised to refuse. Then she gave a small nod, as though surrendering to inevitability. "Very well," she said, but quickly. She gestured to the bearded man. "Henry, unlock it." Henry, another organizer, pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. His fingers fumbled slightly as he selected the largest. The metal scraped against the lock, with a sound that seemed far too loud in the hush that had fallen over the square click. The tower door swung inward, releasing a faint breath of stale air. Henry stepped inside first, his boots crunching on the thin drift of snow that had been carried in and melted into grit. Evelyn followed. Then, after a glance at Poirot, Hastings and Poirot entered behind them. The interior of the clock tower was narrow and dim. A steep wooden staircase spiraled upward, its steps worn smooth by decades of use. The air smelled of old stone, dust, and faintly of oil, the scent of the gears that turned above. Somewhere higher up, the clock mechanism ticked steadily, indifferent to human confusion. Evelyn called out softly, Harold Finch." No answer. Henry climbed several steps, then stopped. "His room is just here," he said, gesturing toward a small landing, where a door stood slightly ajar. Poirot noted at once that the door was not forced. The latch hung loosely, as though someone had closed it without care, or with intention. They entered. The room was small, warmed by a single oil heater that still gave off a faint residual heat. A chair sat near the wall. Upon it, neatly folded, lay the red coat trimmed with white, the belt placed atop it like a final flourish. Beside the chair, aligned with almost obsessive care, stood the black boots, their toes pointing outward at identical angles. A red hat rested on the chair's arm, its white pom perfectly fluffed. But Harold Finch was not there. For a moment, no one moved. Evelyn's breath caught. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't possible." Henry stepped forward, his face pale. "Harold," he called louder, his voice cracking slightly. He crossed to the small adjoining alcove, where a narrow cot stood. It was empty, the blanket pulled smooth. Hastings looked around, bewildered. "Perhaps he stepped out," he suggested weakly. "A man can't vanish into thin air." Poirot's eyes were everywhere. There were no overturned objects, no scattered papers, no sign of struggle. The costume was folded with care, too much care for a man rushing to meet a cheering crowd. The boots, too, were placed like items arranged for display rather than for use. Poirot stepped closer to the boots and crouched. He did not touch them, but examined their soles clean. Too clean for boots meant to trudge through snow to the square. A man dressing hurriedly would leave faint traces of ash or dust. These appeared almost freshly wiped. Poirot straightened. "This is not the room of a man who dressed himself in haste," he said quietly. Evelyn turned to him, trembling. "What are you saying?" "That Mr. Finch did not go down to the square," Poirot replied. Henry's hands clenched. Then where is he? Poirot moved toward the chair. The red coat lay folded with the sleeves tucked in neatly, as though someone had taken pains to preserve its shape. He noted the alignment, the symmetry. Some unknown, Poirot said, wished to create the impression of order. Hastings frowned. But why? If Finch were kidnapped, surely there would be signs, a struggle, a broken lock. Something. Poirot's gaze flicked to the door. A struggle is not always necessary, my friend. Not if one goes willingly, or if one is persuaded. Evelyn sank onto the cot, her clipboard slipping from her fingers. He wouldn't leave, she whispered. Not tonight. Not when the children. Poirot's eyes softened briefly, and yet he is gone. He stepped back, surveying the room once more. Everything had been placed as though in preparation for an audience, but there was no audience here, only witnesses to absence. Poirot spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. We must not waste time, if Mr. Finch has been taken, or if he has been lured away. There is still a chance to find him before the night grows colder. Henry stared at him, fear edging into his expression. You think something bad has happened? Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he pointed to the boots. Look at them, he said, placed with care. Not kicked aside in haste, not pulled on, not worn. They are a message. Evelyn looked up, her face streaked now with tears. A message? Yes, Poirot said softly. That whoever arranged this wanted us to see what is not here. Outside, the bells continued to ring. Their sound, once joyous, now seemed like a cruel insistence that everything was still as it should be. But inside the old clock tower, beneath the ticking gears and the neatly folded costume, the truth was plain. Evergreen's Father Christmas had vanished, and the emptiness he left behind was far more chilling than the snowfall outside. Chapter 3, Fey Footprints in the Snow. The first thing Poirot noticed, upon stepping back into Evergreen Square, was how quickly certainty dissolved. Only minutes earlier, the square had been bound together by a shared expectation, a laugh, a costume, a familiar figure emerging on cue. Now that expectation had fractured, and in its place lay confusion that spread quietly, like cold seeping through stones. Snow continued to fall, soft and persistent, disguising the urgency beneath its beauty. Evelyn Marsh emerged from the tower doorway, her face drawn and pale. She attempted to address the crowd, but her voice wavered. Everyone, please remain calm, she said. There has been a delay. Father Christmas will. Her words failed her. Murmurs rose at once. Low but insistent children clutched their parents more tightly. A few adults exchanged worried glances, already sensing that this was no simple delay. Poirot did not linger. He moved instead to the perimeter of the square, where the snow lay less disturbed by boots and celebration. Hastings followed him instinctively, lowering his voice. You think he left the tower on his own? Hastings said. That someone persuaded him. I think, Poirot replied, that if he left, he did not leave as he intended. Poirot crouched near the base of the tower, where the snow had drifted into a shallow bank. There, clear as ink upon paper, were footprints, boot prints. They led away from the tower in a single, uneven line. Poirot studied them intently. These are not the prints of a man strolling, he said. See how deep they are. The heel digs sharply, the toe drags, the stride is irregular. Hastings bent closer. He was running. Or being hurried, Poirot replied. There is a difference. The prints veered away from the square toward the darker stretch of path that wound along the river. Lantern light reached only part of the way, leaving the rest swallowed by shadow. Poirot rose carefully. Come. They followed the trail, moving slowly so as not to disturb it further. Snow creaked faintly beneath their feet. The sounds of the square voices, bells, distant carols, faded behind them, replaced by the muted hush of falling snow and the low rush of water somewhere ahead. The footprints remained consistent, deep, uneven. Occasionally, the toe of one boot scraped sideways, as though the wearer had stumbled or been pulled off balance. Hastings swallowed. This doesn't look voluntary. No, Poirot agreed. It looks compelled. They reached the bend where the lanterns ended. and beyond it the dark outline of the boathouse emerged by the river. Beyond this point, the snow lay pristine again, save for the continuing line of prints. Poirot paused, lifting his head. "There is something missing," he said. Hastings looked around. "Missing, we have a clear trail." "Yes," Poirot said. "Only one." Hastings frowned. "You mean Finch was alone?" Poirot shook his head. "Unlikely. A man of his age, dressed for performance, does not hurry himself through snow toward a river at midnight without reason." They advanced a little further until the path narrowed again, hugging the river. The water flowed dark and steady, its surface broken by thin plates of ice drifting lazily downstream. And there, near the bend where the river path narrowed, the footprints continued, toward the old boathouse downstream abruptly. Hastings stared. "They just end." Poirot nodded. "They end, and yet there are no return prints." Hastings scanned the ground frantically. Perhaps the snow covered them. Poirot knelt, brushing lightly at the surface with his gloved hand. "Number the snowfall is even. If he had turned back, we would see at least confusion, overlapping marks. But there is nothing." Hastings felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Then he went into the river. Poirot did not answer immediately. He stood very still, his eyes moving slowly across the clearing. "There are no signs of a struggle here," Poirot said at last. "No scuffing, no place where a man fell, and if he were dragged, there would be disruption." Hastings' voice dropped. "Then how did he leave this spot?" Poirot gestured toward the smooth snow beyond the prints, by means that did not touch the ground. Hastings stared at him. "You mean a boat?" "Possibly," Poirot said. "But observe. There are no wheel tracks, no indentations, nothing that would suggest a cart or motor car waited here." Hastings ran a hand through his hair. "This makes no sense." Poirot's expression remained thoughtful rather than troubled. "Snow is a most honest witness," he said, "but even honesty can be selective." He walked the perimeter of the clearing, examining the trees, the riverbank, the path itself. His gaze paused briefly on a low wooden footbridge, farther downstream, half obscured by darkness. "Snow tells stories," Poirot continued, "but sometimes only half of them. It tells us where someone went, but not always how they left." Hastings followed his gaze. "You think Finch was taken away deliberately cleanly?" "Yes," Poirot said, "which requires planning, timing, knowledge of this place." Hastings shivered, "And all while a crowd waited in the square." Poirot nodded. "That is the boldness of it." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the river. Poirot, Hastings said quietly, "Do you think he's alive?" Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "That depends on why he was taken." He turned back toward Evergreen Square, where distant lights still glimmered through the snowfall. "Come," he said. "We must return. The answers will not be found only in the snow, but in the people who believed they knew Harold Finch best." They retraced their steps carefully, leaving the footprints untouched. Behind them, the river flowed on, indifferent and dark, while the snow continued to fall, gently erasing nothing, only waiting. Evergreen's Christmas had lost its center, and somewhere between the tower and the river, a man had vanished in a way that was anything but accidental. The snow had spoken, but it had not told the whole truth. Chapter 4. Fay, the man beneath the beard, Inspector Dale, arrived without ceremony. There was no dramatic entrance, no raised voice or flourish of authority. He came instead with the quiet efficiency of a man long accustomed to arriving after trouble had already begun. His coat bore the dusting of fresh snow, his hat was damp at the brim, and his expression, grave but alert, suggested a mind already measuring possibilities. He listened first. That alone distinguished him. Poirot watched with approval as Dale heard Evelyn Marsh's halting account, examined the inside of the clock tower, and then stood for several moments in silence, absorbing the atmosphere rather than imposing himself upon it. At last, Dale turned to Poirot. "You're Hercule Poirot." Poirot inclined his head. "At your service, Inspector." Dale exhaled slowly. I was told you happened to be visiting. I don't often get help of your caliber in Evergreen. Crime, Poirot replied gently. Does not respect geography. Dale's mouth twitched faintly. So I'm learning. They moved into a nearby municipal office overlooking the square, now largely cleared of townspeople. Only the most concerned remained, clustered in anxious knots near the clock tower, whispering as if afraid to wake something worse. Dale opened a notebook. Harold Finch, he said, age 62, lifelong resident. No criminal record, no enemies, at least none that anyone admits to. Such men, Poirot said, often have the most dangerous enemies of all. Dale glanced up. Those they disappoint. Those they surprise, Poirot corrected. Dale nodded once. Finch wasn't just Father Christmas. That's the part everyone loved, but beneath the beard, there was responsibility. He flipped a page. He was treasurer of the Evergreen Town Fund. Hastings straightened. Treasurer. For nearly 15 years, Dale continued. He managed donations, maintenance budgets, festival expenses. He was trusted. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And recently, Dale hesitated, then spoke carefully. Recently, he began asking questions. The words seemed to settle heavily in the room. He discovered irregularities, Dale went on. Small at first, missing sums disguised as accounting delays. Nothing dramatic, but consistent. Poirot folded his hands. Consistency is the signature of intention. That's what Finch believed, Dale said. He told my deputy last week he intended to set things right after Christmas. Hastings frowned. By exposing someone, several someones potentially, Dale replied. The fund is handled by a committee. Poirot nodded slowly. Ah, responsibility shared is often guilt divided. Dale closed his notebook. There's one name that keeps surfacing, Martha Green. As if summoned by the sound of it, there was a knock at the door. Martha Green entered with the air of a woman braced for judgment. She was in her late 40s, her dark hair pulled back severely, her green organizer's scarf still looped tightly around her neck. She had coordinated Evergreen's Christmas parade for a decade, her efficiency widely praised, her authority rarely questioned. But now, that authority wavered. Inspector Dale gestured for her to sit. Mrs. Green, thank you for coming so promptly. Her lips pressed together. I didn't have much choice. Poirot observed her closely. Her posture was erect, but there was tension in the shoulders. The hands clasped in her lap betrayed a faint tremor. Mrs. Green, Dale said, when was the last time you spoke with Harold Finch? 2 days ago, she replied. At the community hall. And the nature of that conversation. She hesitated. Poirot spoke gently. Madam, Mr. Finch is missing. Candor now may prevent tragedy later. Martha's eyes flicked to him, then away. He accused me, she said finally, of mishandling funds. Dale's pen stilled. Did you? No, she said sharply. At least, not intentionally. There were adjustments, transfers. I assumed they were approved. Poirot tilted his head. Assumptions are dangerous in accounting. Her jaw tightened. He said money was missing, that it had been happening for years. He said if explanations were not forthcoming, he would involve the authorities. Hastings exhaled softly. On Christmas Eve. Yes, Martha said bitterly. He had a sense of timing. Poirot's gaze never left her face. How did you respond? I told him he was mistaken, she said, that everything would look worse than it was, that public accusations would harm the town. And he? Poirot asked. He said, Martha replied, her voice lowering, the town deserves honesty more than comfort. Silence followed. Dale spoke again. Where were you tonight, Mrs. Green, when Finch failed to appear? Here, she said at once, coordinating the square. Dozens of people saw me. That is true, Dale acknowledged. But many people are seen. Not all are observed. Poirot leaned back slightly, his eyes drifting toward the doorway where others waited. He had noticed something, while Martha spoke. Not in her words, but in the reaction they provoked. At the mention of missing money, several figures outside had stiffened. One man, a rotund councillor with florid cheeks, had gone visibly pale. Another organizer had begun to rub his hands compulsively, though the room was warm. A third had avoided looking at anyone at all. Poirot stored each reaction carefully. Martha Green stood. "If you're suggesting I had something to do with Harold disappearing," Poirot raised a hand. "I suggest nothing, I observe." She left stiffly, dignity held together by force alone. Inspector Dale sighed, rubbing his temple. "This town is built on trust." Finch kept the books, if he threatened to expose discrepancies. "He threatened stability," Poirot said. Dale looked at him sharply. "You think someone wanted him silenced?" "I think," Poirot replied, "that someone wanted him stopped." Hastings shifted uneasily. "But to take him on Christmas Eve in front of everyone?" Poirot nodded. "A public moment is the best disguise. All eyes are forward. No one looks sideways." Dale closed his notebook slowly. "You believe the motive is financial?" "One of them," Poirot said, "but not the only one." He rose and walked to the window, gazing out at Evergreen Square. The snow had softened the scene again, making it deceptively peaceful. Harold Finch, Poirot continued, played two roles, one beloved, one burdensome. The beard made him harmless, the ledger made him dangerous. Dale joined him, and now he's gone. "Yes," Poirot said quietly, "but his discoveries have not vanished with him." Behind them, the town hall clock chimed softly. Time was moving on, and somewhere in Evergreen, a man who knew too much had been removed, not because he was Father Christmas, but because he had chosen at last to become something far more threatening. Honest. Chapter 5. Fay the River Path. The river path lay in a hush so complete that even the falling snow seemed reluctant to disturb it. Poirot and Hastings moved slowly, their boots pressing fresh impressions into the pale surface, careful not to obscure what had already been written there. The lanterns lining the path cast weak halos of light that dissolved quickly into darkness, leaving long stretches where the river's presence was sensed rather than seen, a low, persistent murmur beneath the ice. "The footprints are clearer here," Hastings said, bending slightly. "They haven't filled in yet." "No," Poirot replied, "which tells us we are not far behind." The trail they followed was unmistakable. A single set of boot prints, deep and irregular, led them onward with a kind of grim determination. The snow around each mark was scuffed, disturbed in a way that spoke of urgency, perhaps even resistance. Poirot paused, studying the spacing. "The stride shortens here," he said. The man was tiring, or he was being urged forward. Hastings glanced nervously over his shoulder, as though expecting someone to materialize from the shadows. "You truly believe Finch was forced along this path?" "I believe," Poirot said, "that he did not walk it of his own free will." The river came into view at last, a broad, dark ribbon edged with ice, its surface sluggish and ominous. The path narrowed as it approached the bank, curving gently toward a squat structure, half hidden among bare trees, the boathouse. It was old, weathered by years of damp winters and spring floods, its wooden walls darkened almost to black. Snow clung to its roof in uneven patches, and one shutter hung crookedly, as though disturbed by wind or by hands less patient. Poirot stopped. The footprints led directly to the boathouse door, and there, abruptly, they ended. Hastings felt a chill run through him. "This is it," he said softly. "This is where he disappeared." Poirot nodded. "Yes, and observe. There are no other prints approaching. Whoever was with him did not come on foot." Hastings frowned. "Then how?" Poirot gestured toward the river. "Water erases its own tracks." They approached the boathouse with care. Poirot tested the door gently. It yielded at once, swinging inward with a soft creak that echoed far too loudly in the stillness. Inside, the air was sharp with cold and the faint smell of oil and old wood. A small rowing boat rested upside down near the wall, its hull scarred by years of use. Ropes hung from hooks, stiff with frost. Snow had drifted in through gaps in the planks, forming thin white lines along the floor. Poirot stepped inside, his eyes immediately drawn to a small object near the threshold, a scrap of red felt. It lay half, buried in snow, torn unevenly, its fibers unmistakable even in the dim light. Poirot crouched. "From the costume," he said quietly. Hastings swallowed. "So he was here. They brought him here." "Yes," Poirot replied, "but not roughly. See, there is no sign of a struggle." He rose and moved deeper into the boathouse. On a low crate near the river, facing wall, sat a lantern. Its glass was clouded, its metal frame dented with age. Poirot held his hands near it. "Warm." "Recently used," Hastings said, astonished. "Within minutes," Poirot agreed. "Which means someone was here after Finch arrived. Or during." Hastings scanned the shadows nervously. "You don't suppose?" Poirot shook his head. "Number, if violence had occurred here, the signs would be unmistakable. The snow would tell us. The river would tell us." He turned, studying the riverbank just beyond the open doorway. The ice near the edge was cracked, disturbed, not broken, but tested. Mark suggested that a small boat had been pushed off recently, its movement careful, deliberate. Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Quiet, efficient. No tracks to betray it, once it is gone. Hastings frowned. Then Finch was taken away by water. "Yes," Poirot said, "but consider the manner. The torn felt accidental, not violent. The lantern used to guide, not to threaten. Everything here speaks not of harm, but of concealment." Hastings looked at him sharply. "You think Finch wasn't meant to die?" "I think," Poirot said, "that whoever planned this wanted him to vanish. Not to be found injured, not to be discovered at all. At least, not yet." Hastings ran a hand through his hair. But why go to such lengths? Why not simply confront him, or threaten him into silence? Poirot's gaze drifted back toward the path, the square, the town beyond, because Finch was not a man who could be easily frightened. He was trusted, loved. If he spoke publicly, threats would mean nothing. "And so they removed him," Hastings said quietly. "Yes," Poirot replied, "but temporarily, or so they believed." The river shifted, ice plates knocking softly together. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, assembling the picture in his mind. "Consider the care," he continued. "The costume removed neatly, the boots left behind, the path chosen where few would look. This was not a crime of panic." Hastings' voice dropped. "It was a crime of planning." Poirot nodded. "And planning suggests more than one mind, more than one pair of hands." They stood in silence for a moment, the boathouse pressing in around them with its age and secrets. "Poirot," Hastings said, "if Finch is alive, where would they take him?" "Somewhere hidden, somewhere familiar." Hastings frowned. "You mean a place connected to Evergreen?" Poirot finished. "Not far, not foreign, somewhere that does not raise suspicion. This changes the nature of the case." "How so?" Hastings asked. "Because," Poirot replied, "this is no longer merely a disappearance. It is a calculated removal designed to buy time." Hastings' expression darkened. Time for what? Poirot looked once more at the river, then back toward the town lights glowing faintly through the snowfall. "To alter accounts," he said softly. "To destroy evidence, to realign loyalties." They left the boathouse as they had entered, quietly, closing the door behind them. Snow continued to fall, already softening the edges of the footprints that led there, as though the night itself conspired to forget. But Poirot did not forget. Summoner had wanted Harold Finch to disappear without trace, without spectacle, without blood. And that, Poirot knew, was often the most dangerous kind of crime of all. Chapter 6. Fey Secrets. In the town hall, the Evergreen town hall stood a little apart from the square, its brick façade softened by snow, and its windows glowing faintly against the early darkness of Christmas Eve night. It was a building designed to reassure, solid, respectable, and quietly proud of its age. Yet as Poirot stepped inside, he felt at once that reassurance was precisely what it wished to project, and precisely what it concealed. Inspector Dale led Poirot and Hastings down a narrow corridor whose walls were lined with framed photographs of past councils and long-forgotten civic ceremonies. Every face smiled with the confidence of people who believed themselves custodians of something enduring. "Finch's office is at the end," Dale said. "He kept odd hours, said the book spoke more clearly when the building was quiet." Poirot nodded, a sentiment with which I sympathize. The office door was unlocked. Inside, the room was modest but orderly, less austere than Whitaker's office at Rosemont Hall, yet marked by the same devotion to balance and structure. A broad desk dominated the space, its surface cleared except for a blotter, a pen stand, and a single ledger lying open beneath a green-shaded lamp. Poirot moved toward it immediately. "The ledger we saw earlier?" Hastings asked. "One of them," Poirot replied, "but not the most important one." He lifted the book carefully. At first glance, the figures appeared correct, the columns neatly aligned, the sums carried forward with reassuring precision. But Poirot's eyes did not skim. They weighed. He flipped several pages, then he stopped. "Ah," he murmured. Inspector Dale leaned closer. "You see something?" "Yes," Poirot said. "What is missing?" He turned the page back. Along the inner binding, faint tears marred the paper, small, careful perforations where pages had once been removed. Not roughly, not in haste, but cleanly, as though done with a ruler and patience. "Pages have been torn out," Hastings said, "and replaced," Poirot added. He turned forward again. Comparing entries, the numbers matched perfectly, too perfectly. "These are copies," Poirot said quietly. Dale frowned. "Copies of what?" "Of the original entries," Poirot replied, "but rewritten, sanitized." Hastings looked baffled. "But why go to the trouble if the figures match?" "They do not match what Finch knew," Poirot said. "They match what someone wished others to see." Poirot lifted the ledger closer to the light. "Observe the handwriting." Dale squinted. "It looks consistent." "Yes," Poirot said, "consistently not Finch's." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small notebook. Inside were samples Finch had written earlier, notes from the parade planning, correspondence with suppliers, lists scrawled in a firm, slightly slanted hand. Poirot placed the notebook beside the ledger. "The Finch hand is assertive," he said. "The downstrokes are confident. These entries," he tapped the ledger, "are cautious, rounded, deliberate." Hastings' eyes widened. "Someone forged the pages." "Not forged," Poirot corrected. "Copied, with care, with pride, even." Inspector Dale straightened slowly. "You know whose handwriting this is?" "Yes," Poirot said, "or rather, I know whose it resembles." Dale's mouth tightened. "Robert Hale." They summoned him at once. Councilman Robert Hale arrived within minutes, his breath visible in the cool corridor air, his expression one of controlled irritation rather than fear. He was a broad man in his 50s, well-fed, well-dressed, and well-practiced in the art of appearing indispensable. He smiled when he saw Poirot, though the smile did not reach his eyes. "Inspector," he said, "I hear there's been trouble." Poirot gestured politely toward the desk. "Mr. Hale, you supervise the holiday budget, do you not?" Hale nodded. "Among other things." "And you worked closely with Harold Finch?" "For years," Hale replied. "A fine man." Poirot opened the ledger and turned it toward him. "Do you recognize this handwriting?" Hale hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "It's neat," he said carefully. "I suppose it could be mine." Poirot inclined his head. "It is." Silence fell. Hastings felt it, an almost audible shift, as though the room itself had drawn a breath. Hale cleared his throat. "If you're suggesting I altered town records, I suggest nothing," Poirot said gently. "I observe that you rewrote them." Hale's shoulders stiffened. "For the good of Evergreen." Dale's voice sharpened. "You removed pages from Finch's ledger?" "Yes," Hale admitted, "after discussing it with him." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "After discussing. or after discovering? Hale sighed heavily, his resistance softening into something closer to justification. There were discrepancies. Funds moved where they shouldn't have been. Some of it was my responsibility. Some of it was not. And Finch intended to expose this, Poirot said. He intended to tell the council, Hale replied quickly, not the public. But even that would have caused panic. Donors withdrawing. Trust shattered. Poirot folded his hands. So you protected the town by rewriting its history? I protected it from scandal, Hale insisted. I meant to correct the accounts properly. After the holidays, Finch was impatient. Hastings frowned. Impatient enough to vanish? Hale's eyes flicked sharply toward him. I had nothing to do with that. Poirot watched him closely. But you benefited from it. Hale's jaw tightened. If Finch had waited, this would never have happened. Poirot nodded slowly. Exactly. Hale looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Poirot closed the ledger with care. Mr. Hale, the removal of these pages was not the crime that matters most. Dale stiffened. Then what is? Time, Poirot said. He turned to Hale. Finch discovered the truth. He intended to act. Someone, perhaps you, perhaps another, needed time to rearrange the narrative, to replace pages, to move money, to ensure that when Finch spoke, his evidence would no longer exist. Hale swallowed. You're saying that Finch's disappearance was not meant to be permanent, Poirot continued. It was meant to delay. Hastings' eyes widened. So while Finch was gone, the books could be cleaned. Yes, Poirot said, and by the time he returned he would appear mistaken, confused, even dishonest. Dale's face darkened, which would destroy his credibility. And preserve yours, Poirot said quietly to Hale. Hale's voice dropped. I didn't plan for him to be taken, I swear it. Poirot studied him for a long moment. I believe you did not plan the manner. Hale looked up sharply. Then who did? Poirot turned toward the window, gazing out at Evergreen Square, now hushed beneath falling snow. Someone who knew the river path. Someone who understood how to move a man without harm. Someone who believed this was a temporary solution. Dale exhaled slowly. You're saying Finch is still alive? I am saying, Poirot replied, that every action we have seen points toward concealment, not murder. He turned back, his gaze firm. Which means our task is no longer to uncover a body, but to find a man before his absence becomes permanent. Hale sank into a chair, his face ashen. If this comes out, it will, Poirot said calmly. The truth always returns, much like Mr. Finch himself, I hope. The clock in the corridor chimed softly. Time was passing, and somewhere in Evergreen, a man who had believed in honesty above comfort waited, while others raced desperately to make his silence unnecessary. Poirot closed the ledger once more. The disappearance bought time, he said. But time, Inspector, is a resource that always runs out. Chapter 7. Faye, a child's witness. It was nearly midnight when Samuel Pike found the courage to speak. Evergreen Town Hall had grown quieter as the night deepened. Most of the townspeople had been sent home, urged to keep warm and await news. Only those directly involved in the investigation remained. Officials, organizers, and a few anxious parents who lingered in the corridors under the pretense of helping. Samuel sat on a wooden bench near the radiator, his feet dangling well above the floor. He could not have been more than 8 years old. His woolen cap rested in his lap, twisted repeatedly in small, nervous hands. His mother stood a short distance away, speaking in hushed tones with Inspector Dale, her face tight with concern. Poirot noticed the boy at once. Children, he knew, often noticed what adults overlooked, not because they tried harder, but because they had not yet learned what not to see. Poirot approached slowly, lowering himself onto the bench beside Samuel with deliberate care. Good evening, Poirot said gently. You are Samuel? Yes. The boy nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. My name is Hercule Poirot, Poirot continued. You see, Samuel, I help find things that have gone missing. Samuel's fingers tightened around the cap. "You're looking for Father Christmas," he said, in a small voice. "Yes," Poirot replied. "And you wish very much for him to be found?" Samuel nodded again, more firmly this time. "He always comes." Poirot smiled faintly. "Indeed he does." They sat in silence for a moment, the radiator clicking softly beside them. Poirot did not hurry. Silence, he believed, was often the kindest invitation. At last, Samuel spoke again. "I saw him." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Tell me." Samuel glanced toward his mother, then back at Poirot. "I was waiting by the tower," he said, "near the back. I wanted to be close when he came out." "That was very sensible," Poirot said gravely. Samuel straightened a little. "Encouraged," he continued. "I saw Father Christmas talking to a man, not loud, just talking." Poirot's eyes sharpened, though his voice remained calm. "Where were they?" "Near the side of the tower," Samuel said, "where the shadows are." "And the man?" Poirot asked gently. "What did he look like?" Samuel frowned, concentrating. "He was tall, bigger than Father Christmas. He had a coat on and he was carrying a sack." Poirot nodded. "Like the sack Father Christmas carries?" Samuel shook his head at once. "Number not like that." Poirot waited. "It was darker," Samuel said, "and longer, and he didn't hold it nice. He held it heavy." Poirot felt a subtle tightening in his chest. "A heavy sack," he repeated softly. Samuel nodded. Father Christmas looked worried, not angry, just tired. Poirot leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Did you hear what they said?" Samuel hesitated. "Not the words, but I heard the man talking." "And what did you hear?" Samuel's brow furrowed. He sounded mad, not shouting, but tight, like when grown-ups try not to shout. Poirot allowed a pause. Did the voice sound familiar? Samuel looked up at him, then his eyes wide and earnest. "Yes." Poirot held his gaze. "Whose voice was it?" Samuel swallowed. "Mr. Hale." The name hung in the air between them. Poirot did not move. "You are sure?" he asked quietly. Samuel nodded more firmly than before. "He talks loud at meetings. Daddy says he always wants things done his way." Poirot's expression remained gentle, but his mind moved swiftly now, assembling the final pieces. "And the sack," Poirot said. "What happened to it?" Samuel shrugged. "They went away toward the river." Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Thank you, Samuel," he said softly. "You have been very brave." Samuel looked anxious. "Is Father Christmas hurt?" Poirot opened his eyes and smiled. A true smile this time, warm and reassuring. "I do not believe so, and because of you, I believe we shall find him." Samuel's shoulders relaxed visibly. Poirot rose and crossed the room to Inspector Dale, who had been watching from a distance. "The boy has seen something," Poirot said quietly. Dale stiffened. "What?" Poirot lowered his voice. "A meeting by the tower. Finch and a man with a heavy sack." The boy recognized the voice. Dale's jaw tightened. "Robert Hale." "Yes," Poirot said. "And this time, not by handwriting, but by presence." Dale glanced toward the corridor where Hale sat under watch, his confidence already visibly eroding. "That puts him at the tower." "It places him with Finch at the critical moment," Poirot replied. "And it confirms something else." "What's that?" Poirot looked back at Samuel, now sitting quietly beside his mother, sipping cocoa offered by a kind volunteer. "That Finch trusted the man he went with," Poirot said, "enough to follow him without resistance." Dale exhaled slowly, which means Hale didn't act alone. "No," Poirot agreed, "but he acted decisively." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling. Poirot spoke again, almost to himself. "It is always so, Inspector. Adults shout, children notice." Dale glanced at him. "You think this ends tonight?" Poirot nodded once. "Yes, because the truth has found its voice." He turned back toward the bench where Samuel sat, small and solemn beneath the glow of the hall lights. "Truth," Poirot said softly, "does not always announce itself with trumpets. Sometimes it speaks in a whisper, and those who listen, truly listen, are often the youngest among us." Outside, snow continued to fall upon Evergreen, quiet and patient. And somewhere, not far away, a man who had worn a red coat for 20 years waited to be found. His absence sustained not by darkness, but by the fragile illusion that children of all people would see nothing at all. Poirot knew better. And now, so did Evergreen. Chapter 8. The locked boathouse. The boathouse looked unchanged. Snow still clung to its warped roof. The river still whispered beneath its skin of ice, and the path leading to it bore the softened ghosts of footprints half erased by the night. To the casual eye, it was an unremarkable place, forgotten, harmless, and empty. Poirot knew better. "Unlock it," he said quietly. Inspector Dale hesitated only a moment before nodding to the constable, who produced the key taken earlier from the evidence desk. The lock turned with a reluctant groan, as though protesting the disturbance of secrets carefully kept. The door swung open. Cold air rushed out, sharp and stale. The lantern they had found earlier was gone now, removed as evidence, leaving the interior dim and colorless. Yet Poirot did not step inside at once. He stood at the threshold, head slightly inclined, listening. "Do you hear it?" he asked Hastings. Hastings strained his ears. "The river." "No," Poirot replied. "The silence, it is incomplete." They entered. The overturned boat still rested against the wall. The ropes still hung stiff with frost. Nothing appeared disturbed, too little disturbed. Poirot moved slowly across the floor, his gaze fixed not on the walls, but on the planks beneath his feet. He stopped near the center of the boathouse and tapped the floor gently with the tip of his cane. The sound was wrong, hollow. Poirot's eyes brightened with quiet satisfaction. "Here," he said. The constables knelt at once, prying up the warped boards with careful force. The wood protested, then yielded, revealing a dark square beneath, a concealed cellar. A shallow ladder descended into shadow, and from below came a faint sound. No more than a breath, but unmistakably human. "Hello," Hastings called, his voice tight. A weak reply drifted upward. "Here." Inspector Dale did not hesitate. He descended first, lantern raised high. What they found below ended the night's longest fear. Harold Finch lay on a narrow cot, wrapped in blankets, his wrists bound loosely with rope that had been knotted with care rather than cruelty. His face was pale, his beard disheveled, but his eyes, tired though they were unmistakably alive. "Good heavens!" Hastings breathed. Finch blinked slowly as the light reached him. "About time," he said faintly. "I was beginning to think Christmas had been cancelled." Poirot descended carefully and knelt beside him. "Monsieur Finch," he said gently, "you have given us all quite the fright." Finch managed a weak smile. "I never liked surprises." They freed his hands at once. Dale examined him quickly, satisfied that while Finch was chilled and exhausted, he had not been harmed. "You were kept alive deliberately," Dale said. "Yes," Finch replied hoarsely. "That was the bargain." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "With Robert Hale," Finch nodded. "He said it would only be for a few days. Until after Christmas, until the accounts could be corrected." Hastings frowned. "You believed him?" Finch sighed. "I believed he was afraid, and afraid men make promises." Poirot rose slowly. "Tell us what happened." Finch closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. "He met me by the tower, said he needed to show me something urgently. Proof, he claimed, that I was mistaken. I followed him. I trusted him." His voice tightened. "The sack the boy saw, it wasn't for gifts. It was for the costume. He wanted it removed. He said appearances mattered." Poirot nodded. "And then the boat," Finch continued. "Quiet. Downriver a short way. The boathouse cellar was already prepared. Blankets, food, water." He laughed weakly. "More consideration than I expected." Dale's expression darkened. "He intended to let you out." "Yes," Finch said, "once the festival passed. Once the ledgers were replaced. Once my word would mean nothing." Poirot folded his hands. "So the vanishing was never meant to be permanent." No, Finch replied. Just long enough. Silence settled over the cellar. Hastings looked shaken. They were going to rewrite the truth. They tried, Poirot said quietly. But truth, like Christmas, has a way of returning, no matter how carefully one plans its absence. Dale straightened. We'll have Hale brought in at once. Finch nodded slowly. Do it properly, no spectacle. Poirot smiled faintly. You remain Father Christmas to this town, Monsieur Finch, even tonight. They helped him up the ladder carefully, wrapping him in a coat as the cold air of the boathouse greeted him once more. Outside, snow continued to fall, innocent and persistent, as though the night wished to conceal nothing at all. Poirot paused at the doorway and looked back at the concealed cellar, now empty, exposed and harmless. It was never meant to be permanent, he said softly. But now that it had been uncovered, it would never be hidden again. And with Harold Finch alive, and the truth close at hand, Evergreen's Christmas, though shaken, was no longer lost. Chapter 9. Fay Poirot explains the disappearance. Evergreen Square filled once more, though the mood was nothing like the joyous anticipation of earlier that evening. Lanterns had been lit along the paths and strung between posts, their warm glow reflecting softly off the snow and casting long, trembling shadows across the square. Townsfolk gathered in heavy coats and scarves, faces pale with cold and concern, murmuring to one another as they waited. Children clutched mugs of cocoa instead of bells. The clock tower loomed above them, silent now, its authority diminished by the night's events. At the center of the square stood Hercule Poirot. He waited until Inspector Dale gave a small nod, then stepped forward, his posture composed, his gloved hands folded neatly before him. The quiet fell, not because he demanded it, but because he expected it. Ladies and gentlemen, Poirot began, his voice calm yet carrying easily across the square, I thank you for gathering again, despite the distress this evening has caused. A murmur rippled through the crowd, anxious, expectant. You came here tonight to celebrate a tradition, Poirot continued, one that has brought comfort and joy to Evergreen for many years. Instead, you were confronted with confusion and fear. It is only right, therefore, that you are given the truth. He paused, allowing the word to settle. Harold Finch did not abandon you, Poirot said, nor did he meet with an accident, and he was never intended to be harmed. Several people gasped, others leaned forward instinctively. Poirot turned slightly, indicating the clock tower behind him. The disappearance of Mr. Finch was carefully staged, not as an act of violence, but as an illusion. He raised a hand gently. Consider what you saw, or rather, what you were meant to see. These were not the actions of a man dressing for performance, nor of one fleeing in panic. They were placed deliberately to suggest absence without struggle. He shifted his stance, his gaze sweeping the assembled faces. Then came the footprints, one set only, leading away from the tower toward the river, deep, uneven, convincing. They told a story of haste, perhaps distress, but they told only part of the story. Poirot lifted his head slightly. Snow, my friends, is an honest witness, but even honest witnesses can be misled. A soft murmur of agreement followed. The footprints ended at the river path, Poirot went on. There were no return prints, no signs of a fall, no evidence of a vehicle. The intention was clear, to suggest tragedy, or at the very least flight. Poirot's voice hardened slightly, not with anger, but with clarity. But tragedy leaves chaos, flight leaves disorder. What we found instead was control. He gestured toward Inspector Dale, who stepped forward holding an evidence pouch. Though most could not see its contents clearly, the significance was evident. In the old boathouse, Poirot said, we discovered a torn piece of red felt, from the Father Christmas costume, and a lantern that was still warm. These are not the signs of abandonment, they are the signs of movement. Hastings, standing nearby, felt a ripple pass through the crowd as understanding began to dawn. Mr. Finch was taken by boat, Poirot continued. Quietly, carefully, and hidden beneath the very floorboards of that boathouse, in a concealed cellar prepared in advance. He was bound, yes, but gently, fed, kept warm, preserved. A woman near the front pressed a hand to her mouth. "Alive," she whispered. "Yes," Poirot said. "Alive." Relief swept the square like a physical force. Relief mingled with shock, disbelief, and a rising undercurrent of anger. Poirot allowed it to pass, then spoke again. The purpose of this deception was not cruelty. It was time. The word fell heavily. "Harold Finch was not only your beloved Father Christmas," Poirot said. "He was also treasurer of the town fund, a careful man, an honest man. And recently, he discovered irregularities, money misplaced, records altered." Several faces in the crowd stiffened. "He intended to act," Poirot said, "to bring these matters before the council, and that intention frightened someone deeply." Poirot turned his gaze deliberately toward Robert Hale. Hale stood rigid, his face ashen beneath the lantern light, his hands clenched so tightly that the knuckles shone white. "Councilman Hale," Poirot said calmly, "you supervised the holiday budget. You rewrote ledger pages to conceal discrepancies. And when you realized that Mr. Finch would not be delayed by persuasion alone, you chose deception." A hush fell so complete that the faint creak of the lantern posts could be heard. "You met him near the tower," Poirot continued. "A child saw you. You spoke quietly. You carried a sack, not for gifts, but for concealment. You persuaded Mr. Finch to follow you, trusting in your authority and your long association." Poirot's voice remained measured, almost compassionate. "You believed that by removing him briefly, just long enough, you could alter the records, replace the truth, and return him discredited or powerless." He paused. "You turned Christmas magic into misdirection." Hale's mouth opened, then closed again. His shoulders sagged, the weight of the night finally breaking through his practiced confidence. "I never meant to hurt him," Hale said hoarsely. Poirot nodded once. "I believe you did not intend violence, but intention does not erase consequence." Inspector Dale stepped forward. "Robert Hale, you are under arrest for the unlawful abduction and confinement of Harold Finch, and for the falsification of town financial records." The words echoed through the square. As Hale was led away, some townsfolk looked away. Others watched with grim fascination. No one cheered. Poirot watched the lanterns sway gently in the falling snow. "This," he said softly, addressing the crowd once more, "is why truth matters, even when it is uncomfortable." Mr. Finch believed that honesty was more important than harmony. Tonight, that belief nearly cost him his freedom. He inclined his head slightly. Thanks to a child who listened, to snow that remembered, and to a plan that was too careful to be cruel, the truth has returned. A murmur of quiet agreement followed. "Solemn, thoughtful," Poirot concluded. "Christmas is a time of wonder, but wonder should never be used to hide wrongdoing. When it is, the magic grows cold." The lanterns continued to glow, warm against the snow, as Evergreen Square absorbed the truth at last. The deception was over. And the night, though shaken, was finally honest. Chapter 10. Fey Christmas restored. The snow fell more gently now, as though Evergreen itself had exhaled. Lanterns flickered along the edges of the square, their light steady but subdued, casting warm halos upon faces, still pale with shock. The crowd stood in stunned silence as Inspector Dale finished speaking, his words carrying the finality that no winter wind could soften. "Robert Hale," he said firmly, "you are under arrest." Hale did not struggle. The confidence that had once sustained him, through meetings, speeches, and carefully worded reassurances, had deserted him entirely. He allowed the constables to take his arms, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the square, as though he were already rehearsing explanations that would never quite satisfy. No one spoke. As he was led away, Evergreen had trusted him. That trust now lay broken, like thin ice, revealed too late. Poirot watched with an expression neither triumphant nor stern. For him, justice was not a spectacle. It was a correction, a careful rebalancing of what had been disturbed. Only, when Hale disappeared into the shadows beyond the lanterns, did sound slowly return to the square, Murmurs, sighs, the shuffling of boots upon snow, and then a voice, "Make way, please, careful, he's still cold." Heads turned. From the far side of the square emerged a small procession. Inspector Dale, 2 constables, and between them a familiar figure wrapped in a heavy coat, a woolen scarf pulled high around his neck. Harold Finch, for a heartbeat. No one moved. Then a child gasped, "It's him!" The square erupted. Cheers burst forth, unrestrained, relieved, almost disbelieving. Laughter followed, then tears. People pressed forward, calling his name, waving, reaching out as though to reassure themselves that he was truly there, solid and warm and alive. Finch raised one hand weakly, smiling beneath his frost-reddened beard. "Well," he said hoarsely, "I seem to have missed my cue." The laughter swelled richer now, edged with emotion that needed release. Someone pressed a mug of hot cider into his hands. Another draped a blanket over his shoulders. Children stared at him in wide-eyed wonder, as though Christmas itself had stepped back into the square. Poirot stood slightly apart, allowing the moment to belong to Evergreen. Hastings joined him, his eyes bright. "I don't mind admitting," he said. "I feel absurdly happy." Poirot smiled. "That is because resolution, my friend, is a form of kindness." The organizers hurried forward, faces flushed with relief and embarrassment in equal measure. Evelyn Marsh dabbed at her eyes, laughing through tears. "We can still do it," she said breathlessly. "The parade. I mean, if you're willing, Harold." Finch looked around the square, the lanterns, the snow, the children who had waited far too long. He straightened slightly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Samain produced the red coat and hat, retrieved earlier from the tower. Finch paused as they were handed to him, his fingers brushing the familiar fabric. Poirot watched closely. There was hesitation there, not fear, but reflection. Then Finch nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's finish what we started." The bells rang out again, clear, resonant, unbroken. This time, when their sound rolled across Evergreen Square, it was answered with cheers rather than doubt. The parade began anew, modest but sincere. There were fewer musicians, fewer banners, but there was something stronger in their place. Relief earned honestly, joy reclaimed rather than assumed. Poirot and Hastings walked slowly along the edge of the square, as Father Christmas, slightly stiffer now, slightly slower, waved to the children, his laughter softer but unmistakably real. "Faith," Poirot said quietly, "is like fine porcelain. When it cracks, one must not pretend it never happened." Hastings nodded. "But it can be repaired." "Yes," Poirot replied, "if one takes the time." They stopped near the clock tower. Its door now open, its interior light glowing warmly. Snow gathered on the steps, already smoothing over the chaos of earlier hours. "Do you think Evergreen will forget?" Hastings asked. Poirot shook his head. "Number, nor should it. Forgetting invites repetition, remembering invites care." The bells rang again, joined now by laughter and song. Finch passed nearby, catching Poirot's eye. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of quiet gratitude. Poirot returned the nod. As the parade moved on, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice thoughtful rather than grave. "You see, my friend, even Father Christmas cannot vanish forever, not when truth is attentive." Hastings smiled. "Especially when it leaves footprints." Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Precisely." Snow continued to fall upon Evergreen Square, softening edges, mending appearances, but not erasing what had been learned. Christmas had been shaken, but it had been restored. Not by illusion, nor by silence, but by truth patiently uncovered and courage quietly given. And as the bells rang out into the winter night, Evergreen knew once more what it meant to believe, not blindly, but wisely.